Um, we are here today to interview Mr. Kanchan Kaushal from PricewaterhouseCoopers. He is a seasoned litigator in the field of income tax, and we are going to speak about one of the cases in which he's recently appeared and won in the favor of the SSC. The case being Augustus Capital Pte Limited Singapore versus DCIT. This was decided by the ITAT Delhi in the month of October, and it revolves around issues of taxation of income that may or may not have arisen in India, and we will learn more about this case from Mr. Kaushal now. So to begin with, Mr. Kaushal, maybe if I can request you to give us a little bit of a background of this case and how it came to land before the Delhi ITAT, at which point of time you got involved with the case. That will be very helpful for our listeners.
Oh, yeah, Dipankar. We were handling the matter from the very beginning in our organization, and when this addition was made, at that point of time, my view was taken as to whether it is taxable in India or not, in terms of the amendment that had been done. But unfortunately, it went off to a senior counsel because of the huge quantum involved and the legal issue involved. Uh, One of the counsels did not have a view on this particular matter, which was totally favorable. Uh, they felt that there could be a possibility of it being read as it is in the Act. It was at that point of time that I was reconnected with the client, and I continued to have this view that the amendments that have been brought about by the legislature in terms of explanation 5, 6, and 7 as to how they should be read. And according to me, they were to be read in a manner that the issue I felt should have been decided in favor of the SSE, which it got done later on.
So if I understood correctly, and maybe you could explain a bit more as to what was the substance behind the argument that Assisi was making. But if I understood correctly, Assisi was aggrieved because the income tax officer denied the benefit of explanation 7 to section 9(1) subsection 1 of the Income Tax Act to a transaction which SSE contended that particular explanation applies. And perhaps the a dispute arose because the issue as to whether that explanation was applicable in a retrospective manner or was applicable in a prospective manner was something that was at variance between the income tax officer and the assessee. Is this correct? And maybe perhaps you can give a little bit of elaborate view over here, because this is the crux of the dispute.
Absolutely, Dipankar, very well put in. The point here that was for consideration was that there. So let me step back and answer this question. As far as the transfer was concerned, it was a transfer of shares which were outside India. And in view of the judgment of the Supreme Court in Vodafone, where they had very categorically stated that unless and until the situs of the asset is in India, the income will not be taxable in India. In order to undo the principle laid down by the Supreme Court in the case of Vodafone, the legislature brought about an amendment by Finance Act 2012, and they introduced an explanation 5. By introducing explanation 5 to section 911, what they stated was that where a share which derived value from assets in India is transferred even outside India, the income will be taxable in India. Now, the explanation 5 had two particular phrases or words, as I may say so. One of the phrase was any share or interest in a company, within inverted commas, and the other was substantially. So explanation 5 said where any share or interest in a company is transferred outside India, which derives substantial value from assets in India, the income on account of such a transfer shall be taxable in India. Now, this explanation got introduced by way of explanation 5 into the Income Tax Act. The two phrases that I said, any share or interest in a company, as well as substantially, are two words or phrases which could have been uh, interpreted by the revenue in any particular manner, because there was no clarity as to what would be the quantum of any share or substantially. Now, if you go into the definition of substantially, it means more than 90 or 95%, even if you look into the law lexicon. Any could have created absurdity, because assume for a moment that there is one share which is being traded in the New York Stock Exchange, which of a company, which such company derives value, substantial value from assets in India. Now, the legislature never intended, when it was trying to introduce the taxability of indirect transfer, to catch a person who was holding just one share, two shares, or 10 shares. So this word, any share or interest in the company, therefore had a horizontal breadth for the assessing officer to, in his discretion, pick up any amount, any quantum where the transfer of shares was taken. And similarly, there was a lot of discretion with the assessing officer as far as substantially is concerned. By Finance Act 2015 or 16, they again introduced from 1/4/2016 the two more explanations. Now, the explanations that were introduced subsequently were on account of the fact that when explanation 5 got introduced on the legislature, there was a lot of representations made in the month of June itself, May or June of 2012, before the government. And the government had already formed a committee, a SHOAM committee, to look into certain aspects of the amendments that had been brought about. When these representations were made, the Prime Minister specifically referred that the explanation 5 should be clarified. The SHOAM committee very crisply clarified two things. One, it suggested that there should be a definition for any share or interest in the company, and also for the word substantially. For any share or interest, it was suggested by the SHOAM committee that 20% should be taken as the consideration, 20 or 26% should be taken as consideration, which in the act, when it was introduced, was brought down to 5%. And they had also suggested that where the shares are deriving substantial value, the substantial value should be limited to a minimum of 50% of the value in the shares that were being transferred. These recommendations were the second most important recommendation that was being read, and that was in sync with what the government policy were, that nothing should be brought about in a manner where you are taxing the income retrospectively. So they possibly brought about the provisions in a manner in that sync to be introduced from 1/4/2016, which was explanation 6 and 7. Now, the clarifications that came out when these amendments were made by the legislature, the CBDT very categorically, and if my memory serves me right, in one of their circular 41 of 2016, they made it very clear that both explanation 6 and explanation 7 have been introduced in the legislative act by way of a legislative amendment only to make explanation 5 workable. Now, if these explanations were introduced from 1/4/2016, explanation 5 was introduced from 1/4/2012 with retrospective effect from 1/4/1962. Now, any transaction that could have been caught between the introduction of explanation 5 up to 31st of March 2016 without the introduction of 6 and 7 could have led to a lot of litigations coming up on account of indirect transfer. And that is the reason why explanations 6 and 7 were introduced in a manner by the legislature that they should be read along with explanation 5. But the confusion that was brought about by the legislature was that while introducing it through the Finance Act, they brought it with effect from 1/4/2016. That created a bit of a dichotomy between explanation 5 and 6 and 7.
So, and that's a very lucid explanation, Mr. Kaushal. So, if I may ask, because the legislature made explanation 7 expressly effective from 2016, there is a possibility, and indeed this possibility materialized in your particular case, that the revenue contended that exemptions, if any, that has been provided under those two explanations, meaning thereby interpreting the original explanation in a particular way as to what should be substantial holding, revenue could take a argument because the legislature had left or made the explanation 7 expressly applicable only from 2016. So this act of legislature, which made the explanation 7 applicable only from a particular date, actually left open a path for the revenue to argue otherwise for transactions that may have happened from the time the original explanation was introduced and the time when the two other explanations were introduced in the statute book. Is that a correct way of looking at it?
Absolutely, Dipankar, absolutely true. Very well put. Because that itself gave them a lot of discretion, and that was one of the issues, or rather, that was the main issue raised by the revenue itself. That when the legislature has categorically stated as to the date from when explanation 6 and 7 will be effective, then it should be read as it is, and there should not be any further interpretation of the same. But what was important to be looked into in these provisions is something like this. Assume for a moment that there had not been an explanation 6 and 7 at all in the legislature. What would the situation be? Number one. Number two, with the introduction of explanation 6 and 7 with effect from 1/4/2016 and explanation 5 being made retrospective by Finance Act 2012 with effect from 1/4/1962. The third aspect that needs to be seen is the manner in which CBDT has interpreted it. Now, CBDT correctly coined the word in its circular by saying it that they are workable. Explanation 6 makes explanation 5 workable in terms of the point of substantial, because it explained that more than 50% should be taken in as substantial. Similarly, explanation 7 talked about any share or interest as far as 5% is concerned. These were already debated in the Shom committee report. Now, one could, and that is where I started my argument. And my argument before the tribunal was that irrespective of the fact that they have been made effective, explanation 6 and 7 have been made effective from 1/4/2016. If you are not going to staple it, if you are not going to read it along with explanation 5, then how would you like explanation 5 to be applied to any fact of the case? Rather, one of my argument before the tribunal was also, though they did not consider it, one of my argument before the tribunal was that either you make explanation 5 workable from 1/4/2016. That means prior to 31st of March, nothing is taxable at all on account of indirect transfer, because today you do not have that uh, quantum as to what is the quantum that would be taxable in terms of explanation 5. And once any amendment stands done, or a legislative addition stands done in the act with an intention to make a provision workable, then it has to be read from the date on which that particular liability of taxation has been introduced. Now, you should appreciate one point, that explanation 5 is a substantive amendment made in the provisions of the Act. And why I consider it substantive rather than procedural, I have a very simple thumb rule. If there is an amendment which makes an impact on the liability of an assessee, or on the pockets, it hits the pocket of the assessee, it is substantive. It cannot be procedural. Anything procedural cannot add on to a liability, number one. Number two, if some provision subsequently being introduced is making the substantive provision workable, then you cannot read it at a gap of 3 or 4 years. What happens to those 4 years? The legislature does not intend to have litigation. Once the legislature has clarified in explanation 6 and 7, even if one reads the circular in detail, by which explanation 6 and 7 were in the Income Tax Act, they are clarificatory, because they talk about for the removal of doubt. And therefore, I don't see a reason that even up to the apex court stage, why should the decision of the tribunal be not upheld, and this issue of 6 and 7 not be considered as stapled, as joint, as inextricably linked to explanation 5. One important point raised by you, Dipankar, was that this is an exemption provision. Now, even in case of exemption provisions, where there is a circular which is beneficial to, or which clarifies some certain things in favor of the assessee, that needs to be taken, that needs to be given a very liberal interpretation. It has to see how things are working. You cannot have a provision which very categorically makes it clear subsequent to 1/4/16 how explanation 5 is workable, but for the period 2012 to 31st March 2016, we leave it in suspended animation. The legislature, or even the courts, will never leave a period under suspended animation. It cannot be left in vacuo or in limbo. And that is why I felt that my argument of reading explanation 6 and 7, A, as clarificatory, B, for removal of doubt, and C, that they make it workable as far as explanation 5's implication to facts of any case are concerned, and therefore they should be read together, and that's what the decision of the tribunal was.
Thank you. And I think this probably explains all that was there in the case. I have two questions, and the first one of them, the first of them is basically the kind of external aid or the interpretational aid that the Indian tax tribunals are used to considering while interpreting provisions which have a cross jurisdictional effect. So in this particular case, if we see, they refer to UN Convention, they refer to circulars of domestic law, and they may have referred to other interpretational aids as well. Now, this question is basically broader than this case. In your experience of arguing many matters before the Indian tax tribunals, as you have, uh, if you see that there are interpretational gaps, how open are tax tribunals looking at external aids for interpretation? And what are, in your view, some of the important external aids that they refer to?
Well, if I just take you back a little to one of the celebrated judgments of Motorola by the special bench, where a lot of interpretational aids were taken into consideration by the tribunal. As far as the high courts are concerned, if my memory serves me right, even prior to that, they had taken into consideration external cases, cases by Australian apex courts, the UK courts, the US courts. There is no stopple as far as our judiciary is concerned. They're very vibrant, and a lot of vitality is there in them. They consider, they've been very judicious. You cannot have judgments like Vodafone outside India. I have not come across cases like a Motorola by special bench, like the AMP matter, the advertising, marketing, and publicity issue by the Delhi High Court in the case of LG. Then, whether this was the decision that I just argued, there was an earlier decision where a law was changed in terms of the transfer pricing officer's order and its implication, and how far does it bind the assessing officer by the provisions of 92C4. That was brought about, I think, by 1st of October 2009, and also a very recent decision of the Madras High Court in Medanta, where they have also referred to certain sections and they have referred to external aids. So I think external aids are extremely important, and I have been lucky in relying upon them in many such cases that I have argued, and even my peers and my superior counsels who have argued across the country, whether at the tribunal or high court, even at the tribunals, I found them to be acceptable, and a lot of relief has been given on these external aids. So these external aids could be reports of the OECD, they could be the Vienna Convention, they could be model treaties, they could be other TP regulations, Australian tax cases, Australian regulatory things that we've argued in certain cases of AMP. So I feel these are all aids which are being considered across our judiciary, starting from the tribunal up to the High Court and Supreme Court.
Thank you. Finally, the last question. This transaction, which was, the transaction that was questioned and which led to the case which you argued before the Delhi ITAT, may not be the only example where revenue is pursuing a proposition that they pursued in your particular case. There may be other examples, and there may be other cases where they are taking a similar opinion and could be before other tribunals or courts in India. So the question that I have for you essentially is that do you think that we have heard the last on this particular point, or do you think this matter will go up, get litigated, and we will have a final view from the Supreme Court or from a High Court at a subsequent time?
Dipankar, we already have a High Court decision as far as the Delhi High Court decision is concerned in one of the cases of Kopal. And there are two advance authority decisions also on them. Both the advance authority decisions have also partly one and partly the other have considered. So if you join the two, they've considered both explanation 6 and 7. They've also been litigated by the department in the High Court. So we do have a High Court decision in our favor, though it has not considered explanation 6 and 7 so discreetly, but it has surely considered the Shom Committee report and its recommendations. And you'll find other matters also coming up in different high courts. I think the final reply will have to come from the Supreme Court as to whether the provisions of 6 and 7 explanation should be read retrospectively with explanation 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaushal, for answering all these questions and for your time this afternoon. We look forward to interacting with you in future, and I'm sure our viewers, our readers will find this interview very, very interesting, both from a perspective of analyzing this case law, also from the perspective of understanding the approach that courts take when they are faced with essentially interpretational questions, deep interpretational questions that arise out of different amendments of the tax law. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much for all your time.